we thought we'd, after we've kind of settled in from our traveling from 2019, we thought we'd put together a little video of the kind of the tips and tricks that we've learned as we went along. So this is our 22 tips that we learned in 2019, and we hope that at least one or two of them might be helpful for you or give you ideas on helping you solve your own problems in your own van. So let's get started with tip number 1. So tip number 1 is using these non-slip shelf liners, and we use them everywhere on shelves. If you notice up here in the front, we've got them here because there's nothing worse than these things falling down on you while you're driving down the road. But yeah, it just helps hold things in place. So that's tip number 1. So tip number 2 is kind of along those same lines, only down. We like to kind of put a few things in our shelves in the electrical cabinet, and you see we do have the non-slip liners in there. But the problem with this electrical box is the back of those shelves is open, and so things were sliding off the back, and it's really hard to get things back out of there once they go down there. So Left Buddy took some aluminum angle, which is just a little 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch L shape, and he attached that to the back using double stick tape, and that's attached to the back. So now, I don't know if you can see in there very well, now it's a little harder for things to fall off the back. However, that we do try to make sure we don't put anything metal on these shelves just in case it does fall off the back, that we don't short something out in our electrical system. So that's tip number 2. Okay, moving on to tip number 3. Tip number 3 is use these little USB fans. We do have a max air vent, which does really well, and we do have an air conditioner. However, we can only use our air conditioner if we're hooked up to electric plug-in. So there are times when we can't use that, so a little extra airflow with the little DC fans helps out a lot. And it also just helps move the air around the van. If you notice that our fans are just in the ceiling and just basically blow down or up, in order to get a good airflow, we kind of position these. At night, we'll position these. If you notice, we have 2 of them, one at each end of the bed, and we will blow those right on us when we're asleep, and that helps keep us cool if we don't have the air conditioner on. But then we'll move these around, especially if we're just sitting in the van, and just help move airflow around. So that's tip number 3. Tip number 4 is use square containers to maximize your space. This really was real relevant for our refrigerator. If you notice, our refrigerator is not very big. This is a Dometic, I'll have the actual model numbers in our gear page on our website, and I'll have a link below in the description. But we only have 26 liters in here. I do manage to get a week's worth of groceries and leftovers in here, but I was rather lucky. I have these 30-year-old Tupperware containers, if I can bring them over here. These really old Tupperware containers fit just perfectly down in here. And so that, as you can see, this really maximizes the space in here. So I'm really able to get a lot in there. And I pack this thing, I pack every square inch in here. I don't quite have enough to fill everything up, but there are some other things that go in there. These are a little more modern Rubbermaids. They're not, if you notice, they're not quite as rectangular as the old Tupperware, and so you might have to search around to find something that really maximizes your space. Let's see if you can. So yeah, this I really pack this thing full in order to make it work. So that is tip number 4. Okay, tip number 5 has to do with tablecloths. I mean, normally when we're at a campsite and we have a picnic table, we'll put a tablecloth on. And we have these nice little metal clips that help hold it down when it's windy. However, there are times when the picnic table's too thick. Sometimes the picnic table has a concrete top, or it's just a really piece thick of wood. And notice these only work up to, I know, about 1 inch or so thickness on a picnic table. So we kind of were in a bind one time when the clips wouldn't work, but we still wanted to set up our tablecloth. So we actually took a couple bungee cords, hooked them together, and just slid them over the end and put a pair on each end, and that held it down in the wind, and that worked out great. The only trick is to find the right lengths so you can get some tension on there, but not too tight that it's not going to fit. So that is tip number 5. Okay, tip number 6 is if you're going to be carrying around knives, make sure they're protected. And you can make a knife sheath out of just scrap cardboard and duct tape, which is what I did here. We were kind of in a hurry when we were leaving, and I wanted to take my nice chef's knife with us, but I wanted to make sure it was protected. So I didn't have time to actually order one. You can buy some nice looking ones, but I was in a hurry, so I just made one out of cardboard and duct tape, and it's held up all summer long. And we'll see if I continue using it or spend the money and actually get a nice one. So that was tip number 6. Okay, tip number 7 is, if you notice, we kind of have our wastebasket right near our gray water tank. So when we're pulling this out to dump our gray water tank, I just move the wastebasket over, so if it drips out of that drain it'll drip into the wastebasket instead of dripping on the floor. So that's a pretty simple one. That's tip number 7. Okay, tip number 8. Tip number 8 is just be mindful of your freshwater usage and your gray water usage and your electricity. So along those lines is, sometimes in the morning we'll boil up some water for tea or oatmeal, and we'll have a little bit left over in the pot. So instead of just dumping that down the drain and wasting that electricity and fresh water and gray water, we'll actually use that hot water to wash our breakfast dishes. So that is tip number 8. Okay, tip number 9. This is kind of particular to our unique setup. We have you can see here, we have a cutting board that covers our sink. And so when we're driving down the road, sometimes this faucet will drip, and we really don't want that water on our wooden cutting board, because it'll cause it to swell a little bit or whatever. So when we're going down the road, we actually turn it, and so we have a cloth under here, and since we have our RV fluid in there, you can see that it has been dripping a little bit, or RV antifreeze. That's what the pink is. So we just turn that, put a cloth underneath, and it catches any drips, and so it doesn't really drip a whole lot, but especially if we're changing elevation, it'll sometimes drip just a little bit. So just keep that in mind if you happen to have a similar setup. So that's tip number 9. Okay, tip number 10. This took us a while to learn, but we eventually came to the conclusion that fresh fruits and vegetables need to be hung instead of sitting in a container or a drawer, because when you're driving down the road, it is bumpy. Things are going to bump around and move around, and that might be okay for your hardy vegetables like onions and potatoes that can take that abuse, but things like tomatoes and cucumbers, they will get very damaged going down the road. We originally had them in a tote and then in a drawer, and even if I put a tomato, so even if I put tomatoes in an own little separate container and stuck it in a drawer, it would still split open. So we started trying to hang it, but the next issue was how to hang it. We didn't really want to hang it under the bed because that would be in the way of the view of the driver looking out the back. If we hung it from up here at the foot of the bed, then it was in the way of getting in and out. If we hung it from like these T-tracks here in the kind of the middle of the van, then we would bump our heads on it. We were really struggling with where to put it. We eventually were hanging them on the side here, but then they would bang against the side wall and get damaged that way. So the solution we came up with in the end was we actually got a much sturdier net bag. This we bought on Amazon. We actually haven't fully tested it out yet, but this is supposed to hold up to 40 pounds of weight, and it's kind of stretchy. You notice we have it hanging basically right behind the driver's seat. So it's out of the way when we're standing and cooking or standing at the sink. So that works out really well, and we'll let you know in season 2 if we have any issues with it. But it's also convenient because then it's right where we're cooking, so we can get our fruits and vegetables right out of there. And that should hold quite a bit. So we'll let you know at the end of season 2 how well that worked out. So that was tip number 10. Okay, tip number 11 is, this van floor is a hard surface and it's kind of cold when it's cold out. So putting a nice rug in, a nice soft warm rug, is really nice on your bare feet. So if you're getting ready for bed and taking off your shoes, it's nice to have something soft and warm to stand on. Or if you're just hanging out in the van and want to go around barefoot, that really adds to the comfort. So that's tip number 11. Okay, tip number 12 has to do with closing our sliding door. We have the retractable running board on our sliding door. So it's very easy for us to know when that sliding door doesn't close all the way because it won't retract. Let's see if it'll do it this time. So if you notice, the step is still out, which means this door is really not quite all the way closed. We actually struggled with this for a while, trying to figure out what was going on. And this appears to be something particular to Ford Transits, and I don't know if it's because we have things really airtight, but what we kind of Googled and finally figured out is it has to do with the air pressure inside the van. So all we have to do is open another door or window, and then when we go and close it, notice the running board retracts in and the door is completely closed. So hopefully that will help you with some frustration. So that was tip number 12. Okay, tip number 13 is, I'm a photographer. Even if you just want to make sure you don't miss that shot, I always have my camera sitting between the two seats and ready to go, because you never know when you're going to have that shot going down the road. That's how we caught that American black bear when we were in Sequoia National Park. We were just driving down the road and the bear just happened to be along the side of the road. So make sure your cameras are accessible and ready. So that was tip number 13. Okay, tip number 14. A lot of times the passenger will be working on their laptop while we're going down the road, and especially if you have that plugged in when it's recharging, this laptop will get really hot, especially if you're wearing shorts. And so our little solution was, we normally have our little road atlas nice and handy. So we'll just place that under a laptop. It's perfect size, and that kind of protects your legs from that heat. The spiral does kind of leave a little imprint on your legs, but that's okay. So that's tip number 14. Tip number 15. We store our window shades underneath our mattress, which is great. However, we also like to store, when we're going down the road, all our luggage up on top of the bed for our clothes. And that puts a lot of weight on this mattress. So if you're pulling these out, just pull the weight off the mattress before you pull these out, and it'll actually probably help with wear and tear on the shades too, because there won't be as much pressure when you pull them in and out. So that is tip number 15. Okay, tip number 16. If you notice, we've got the seat swiveled around here, and there isn't a whole lot of room between the seat and the windshield. So the tip is just remember to put your windshield shade in before you turn the seat around when you get set up for camp. It just makes it easier than trying to work in behind the seat there. It's so much easier when it's out of the way. So that's tip number 16. Okay, the next few tips have to do with the way we hook our bikes up to our van. So tip 17 is we like to make sure our front wheels of our bikes aren't flopping around when we're going along. So we actually use these big twisty ties to secure those front bike wheels so they aren't flopping around when we're going down the road. So that was tip number 17. Tip number 18 is our bikes kind of rub together here. So we just put a little rag that we tied on there just to keep those bike parts from rubbing against each other, because over time that could actually do some real damage to the bikes. So, I mean, that's kind of a tip for everybody. Make sure that you don't have things rubbing together as you're going down the road. So that was tip 18. Tip 19, if you notice, we have quick release front wheels, so just not to tempt anybody from stealing our wheels off our bike while they're sitting there. We actually just take one of our regular bike locks and we run it through the quick release wheels and through the frames, and just to keep those secure, to not tempt anybody from taking those. And kind of along the same lines, so tip number 20 is kind of particular to our setup. We have a Rack Attack swing away arm and an old Yakima bike rack that holds 2 bikes. However, it mostly swings out of the way, but we just can't quite open this door to its locking position. So we actually put pipe insulation around the bike rack so we don't scratch our nice finish on our door there if it hits that bike rack. So that was tip number 20. Tip number 21 is kind of related, because this doesn't lock open. When we're getting in the back here, we really don't want this door swinging closed on us, especially if we're not quite level. So we actually use a bungee cord, and we'll, if I can get it through here. So we'll bungee this onto the rack through the door handle and just back around to the rack there on the bike, and that'll keep the door from closing on us while we're getting into the van. So that was tip number 21. And last but not least is tip number 22, and that's have a little checklist when you pack up camp so you don't forget anything. We actually have 22 items on this list, and we keep it right here on the visor so it's nice and handy. But we originally didn't think we needed one. We've heard of other RVers using one, but we're a camper van and it's actually pretty simple when you pack up. But over time we would forget something, and it may be something as simple as, oh, we didn't fill up our water bottles and so we have to stop and get our drinks. So we started writing things down on a list, and it started out with just a few items, and then it kind of grew to this list of 22. I won't read them all off for you. They're in our blog post on our website. And there's a link down in the description if you want to go read what it is. But yeah, that was, something we didn't think we needed, but it turned out, I don't know if it's our age or we're just forgetful. But yeah, we do use that list, and we make sure we look at it every single time we pack up camp so we don't forget anything. So that was the last of our tips. I hope you enjoyed these, and hope you found some of them helpful or entertaining. And if you haven't already, click that subscribe button, and hopefully you'll enjoy our next video as well. Thanks for watching.